We have a visitor.
Yes, we have a visitor. As you perhaps anticipated, this talk is about spiritual advancement. Its starting point is the early Buddhist scheme of stages on the path towards spiritual fulfillment, traditionally described in Buddhism as the noble eightfold path to liberation, which leads from limited forms of existence in samsara, in the round of rebirth, to the achievement of transcendental state of nibbana, as we say in Pali, in Sanskrit nirvana. The noble eightfold path is envisaged as a stream, sota. So the first stage on it is referred to in the Theravada tradition as stream entry, sotapatti, and is achieved in two phases. The first phase represents one's stepping on the path, which is described in the commentaries of Pali Canon and in Buddha Ghosha's Visuddhimagga, path of purification, as winning the path of stream entry. Sotapatti-magga, path of stream entry. When one makes this step, one becomes one of the 8 types of noble persons, as the traditional term goes, Arya Pugala. But this winning of the path of stream entry is not, according to this interpretation, a process, but a single moment. It is immediately followed by the second phase, in which one experiences the fruit of stream entry, sotapatti-phala. When this fruit of stream entry is won, one becomes a stream enterer, sotapanna, the first true stage of sanctity. The condition to become one is that one has eliminated 3 fetters. Namely, the first one is described by a very difficult Pali word which sounds sakaya diddhi. Now, diddhi means view. Sometimes it is said faith, but that's not quite correct. Kaya is body. Sat means existing. So, view of existing body. Now, the commentaries interpret it, and it is generally accepted that it is viewing the body as self. Well, am I my body, or am I not? Is my body only my vehicle? And so, anyway, so that is a theme which could be a subject of a single talk itself. But one has to overcome the sense of oneself, be completely unselfish. The second one is that one does not doubt any longer about the path and the possibility of liberation. It is called the vicikiccha, doubt. So one has overcome doubt. And the next one, silabata paramasa, literally means abstention from it's like translated on the other side of your sheet, from vows and rules, regulations. Simply I translated it sort of freely as ethical and ritual formalism. So one is not bound by what usually religious as churches require and do. Spiritual path in Buddhism is a free one, originally, without accretions which go with organization of religion into churches and sects. Now this achievement of stream entry represents a very advanced stage of progress which requires much effort. But it means that once somebody achieved it and is sure about it, he is safe from rebirth in the lower spheres of life, such as hells, the realm of hungry spirits, which in European context is usually translated as purgatory, or being born in animal kingdom. So I assume that you know the basics of Buddhism and its teaching of rebirth, reincarnation, the round of rebirth. And whoever achieves this stage of stream entry is sure to progress to final liberation. And again, it's controversial. At the latest, after 7 rebirths in the human or heavenly worlds. So he cannot think lower, but if not earlier, in 7 lives, he reaches nirvana. And that is in the discourses of the Buddha written down later on, and it is the contents of the Pali Canon. Further stages on the path are then once returner, whoever achieves it with further shedding of ties, fetters, has to be born in this world only once in order to finish his spiritual progress towards nirvana. And the third stage is non-returner. That means whoever has reached that stage of spiritual progress is no longer born in this world, but in a very high spiritual realm, from where he then passes to the definite state of nirvana. Now I shall deal in this talk only with stream entry, sotapatti, or perhaps more accurately, with the first step towards it, and perhaps even more precisely, with the process of entering on the path, even before the achievement of the path of stream entry is fulfilled. I, in fact, am not a sort of literal follower of Buddhism and its scriptures. I have my own thoughts about it, analyzing them and imagining what really is meant by it, because the Pali Canon, as written down after the Buddha's death, first memorized and after a few centuries written down, was written down by minds who apparently had a tendency to formalize, to be rather rigid. So I dispute this so-called Orthodox interpretation of the Theravada tradition in its commentaries, whereby gaining the path of stream entry, sotapatti-magga, is immediately followed by the experience of the fruit of stream entry, sotapatti-phala. We can imagine that if a monk who has renounced the world already in order to progress on the spiritual path quickly, when he suddenly experiences this sudden revelation, a distant glimpse of nirvana, of liberation, so that he feels, yes, I have now entered the stream. So he first experiences the moment of acquiring it, and because he is practically without ties to the world, he immediately then feels the fruit that he is safe. He is really now on that level where he cannot do anything which would bring him in the future into some state of woe. But if we take it as there were also lay followers who also were trying to live according to the rules, ethical behavior, meditation, and so on, denying oneself pleasures which lead one astray. So they certainly would not have had, I think, this experience achieved or accomplished so quickly. So it appears to me that this preserved description is too schematic and mechanically minded. And there actually is not any clear description of this process in the Pali Canon, in the discourses of the Buddha. But this explanation is done in commentaries written a few centuries later, even after the Pali Canon. On the contrary, I have found in the discourses of the Buddha a quotation, a description, which suggests that there may be a time gap of considerable length between winning the path of stream entry and the experience of the fruit of stream entry. And the case in point is when the Buddha speaks of the so-called limbs, anga, which I translate rather occasions or instances of stream entry. And he enumerates them. And that is the way a lay Buddhist behaves. What is beneficial to him. And what is associating with righteous people. Well, that's what we're doing when we come to the Buddhist society, I suppose. Listening to dhamma talks. Well, maybe that's just what you're doing now. Deep reflection, that means really analyze and be interested to understand the teaching. And conforming to dhamma principles. So there are, of course, 5 precepts. Like every religion would have a certain guidelines how to behave. But I go even a little further. I have a hunch that the reference to limbs of stream entry may be understood as assuming a period of time or an element of duration, even between, metaphorically speaking, lifting one's foot from its base in the world and putting it down onto the path to liberation. While the foot is, so to speak, still moving in the air. Yes. So this picture, I think, should illustrate what I mean. That it is not, one doesn't enter the path yet, but one is intending to do so. So like one first, when one goes somewhere, lifts one foot, puts it down, this is the first step, so one is on the way. But in this context, when it is not really walking, only metaphorically, it is a process in the mind. One decides, yes, I will follow in the direction of Buddhist teaching towards nirvana. So that is lifting the foot. But before one puts it down, that means before one really sheds the fetters, the obstacles, a long time may pass. And in that time, one simply encourages oneself to carry on in this way as expressed in the text by this associating with good people, listening to talks about teaching, thinking about it, not just superficially and forgetting it, and really fulfilling the requirements of the precepts. Are simply ethical principles. And so this intermediary process, before one actually achieves the entry, I call entering the stream. So that is my difference, which I am bringing in after deep reflection into it. I have no notion of stream entry fulfilled, but I have some inkling that I'm trying to enter. Yes, So that is why I call the talk "Entering the Stream." There is no Pali equivalent to this expression. There is stream entry, sotapatti, but there is those entering the stream. The Pali texts speak about stream entry only, sotapatti, as a fait accompli, as a thing done, achieved, and not about entering the stream as a process which would take some time. And the only indication to what I mean is just what I quoted, that Buddha at one point speaks about limbs of stream entry. But the Pali does not have this ability like English has to express continuous action, like you say, not I go, but I am going. You are just in the process of going. And that is not possible to express in Pali. And so it is indicated by this word limb of stream entry, a part, an instance of stream entry. When I am doing these things which we are doing, wanting to have some support in our intention to eventually really get onto the path. And so I think that the expression which I have chosen for the talk, entering the stream, is rather telling. It expresses it quite well. I actually I don't know whether it exists anywhere else. I haven't come across that term, entering the stream. Always it is stream entry. Or even if there is somewhere, so it is, the stream entry is meant by it, sotapatti. But I would say that sotapatti is stream entry, but not entering the stream before one actually entered it. And this expression occurred to me when, after finishing a period of sitting in meditation, I was scrutinizing the mental experiences I had during the session. In other words, I was trying to find out what was going on when I was sitting down and wanting to meditate, or deciding that I would meditate. What I was doing was I was trying to eliminate conceptual thinking, sense impressions and so on, and all this chatter which occurs in the mind when we sit down and start meditating, wanting to go in. So there is so much happening. And that is what the Buddha actually recommends. He says one should alternate calming the mind, meditation for calming the mind, samatha bhavana, with scrutiny of the mind. When one is analyzing the mental processes to get some insight into what's going on. And that is called, again, by the technical term, insight meditation, vipassana bhavana in the Pali context. So, having now explained the more difficult part based on scriptural sources, I shall now talk more about what I would base on my own efforts or experiences. But I think that one always should start with the Pali Canon. I am of the opinion that the oldest and most reliable source of information on what the Buddha taught is Pali Canon. Its teachings on how to travel along the path of spiritual progress, about the stages of this progress, and the criteria of its validity are the most suitable tools for the purpose even today, in spite of numerous later reformulations and new expositions of the same topic by many learned and possibly even illuminated minds. I don't mean to reject the later teachings, not even the later Theravada expositions, which I have disregarded to begin with. And I don't want also to belittle scriptures of various Mahayana schools or the uncounted books by Zen masters and writers on Zen, which may contain some valid, useful and profound information, instructions, insights, and may be sometimes even inspired from the depth of the very source of spirituality itself. But even then, if I am confronted by them and by the Pali Canon simultaneously, it is the Pali Canon for me which bears unmistakable signs of coming from the enlightened world teacher of our epoch. All later sources, even if inspired by genuine experience, are, after all, secondary in the sense that they would not have been possible without the original Buddha's message. And this message is the one on which we can therefore safely build the foundation of our own progress. After all, the greatest of the later teachers did this themselves and did not intend to fully replace the Buddha's original message. Therefore, if we do build up our own progress on the basis of the Buddha's early message, then and only then, the later secondary sources become really useful to us and we start understanding them properly. Otherwise, we tend to overestimate our initial progress, as the later texts are not helpful enough in checking its validity, its depth, or the stage on which we might find ourselves. A little example I may give. Many kinds of experiences of different depth are often referred to in Zen literature by the expression satori. And usually this is translated as enlightenment. This may be very misleading for the students of this literature as well as for those who are trying to break through to the Zen experience. It seems that often some slight touch of unusual mental state, sometimes even just only a sort of emotional uplift, is taken by some in Zen circles for Satori. And of course, when I am talking this way, I am not originally in that. For example, the great German authority of Zen Buddhism, Professor Karel von Durkheim, expressed just this warning in his talk in Stuttgart as early as 1967, when Zen popularity was very high. It could be argued that an accomplished Zen master does not need to stick to the traditional terminology and can choose his words skillfully according to the needs of his pupils in a given situation. True, that may be so, but how many accomplished Zen teachers are available nowadays? Do you know one? And how many Zen enthusiasts in the West really do have a competent teacher? Mere conceptual knowledge of Zen paradox phraseology does not really help. Systematic knowledge of the Buddhist teachings in the Pali Canon, however, provide us with a good map. But we don't even have to take that source too rigidly and dogmatically and have to apply our thought and analysis to it, which the Buddha himself recommends us to do, even with respect to his own teaching. For that purpose, you can read the Kalama Sutta, where it is well expressed in his own words. So now I would like to draw in my subsequent reflections on my own modest experiences, and also to try to assess how they may fit into the traditional framework of the Buddhist teachings. Now, the reason I expose the bits of my experience to public comment may be quite pragmatic. I do not wish to gain recognition or acceptance of what I shall try to say, let alone to offer it as guidance or instruction to others. But if I have to formulate these bits of experience in words, I am forced to inspect them and my other beliefs more closely, and may find that here and there I have overestimated my position, or that the way I am describing it sounds artificial, constructed, unnatural, or that it reveals some other deficiency, and maybe you will point it out to me at the end. If, however, some of my formulations pass this test, then their comparison with clear and nearly perfect description in the Pali Canon will help me towards better clarification of my own experience. Further tests may come then, of course, from your comments as my listeners. I do not want to say that if we have a discussion, that my convictions may quickly change. That happens very seldom, that in discussions one changes one's position. That is something one can do only really subsequently after deep reflection. But what one can learn from comments, even if one does not accept them, and from opposition, is that they produce in us a certain reaction. And the extent to which we automatically identify ourselves with that reaction against the comment. And to the extent to which we succeed in checking our reactions to the comment, can be a measure of our actual spiritual progress or failure. That can be described again at length, and it's something which is based on the sotapatti-phala method, being aware of reactions. So in these ways, I hope to benefit from giving a talk to you tonight. So please prepare your weapons. Whether my talk may be of any benefit to you, I of course do not know. That is beyond my care. And so I am only too grateful to you that you are willing to make my audience. But let me at last proceed to the actual theme of the talk. The expression entering the stream, besides being extraordinarily telling, is very near the reality of life, which itself is a sort of stream. But when speaking of life, I do not mean life as such, a life which is one for all of us, or some other similar sort of abstraction. I mean simply life as I experience it, my life, directly flowing within what may be called my own being. But please do not react if you are knowledgeable in Buddhist teachings. According to the Orthodox post-canonical Buddhist view, that there is no I, and that life is impersonal and cannot be mine. I would like to remain with my feet firmly on the earth, and so I speak as daily experience has taught me to. My life is my experience of being alive, of a process, of a movement going on within me, which I can follow, observe inside my being when I am a bit quiet, sitting perhaps with closed eyes. I suggest that each one of you must have had a similar inward experience of being alive, or you can have it if you care to have a look within yourselves without any preconceived intention. I would like you to check within yourself the description I shall try to convey to you, and not to take my words as arguments put together by my thought, or as arguments which I would like to impose on you and which you could accept or reject. So it's just a description of what I experienced, and what I am suggesting is that you try it on yourself. It seems to me that when looking within ourselves and trying to find out, to see what there is inside that can be called life or living, we are able to quite easily discover and perceive distinctly the stream of life in us. Only we should not think that it is something spiritual or subtle. And further, we must be prepared that it is not on the surface of our consciousness, but somewhere deeper below, as a certain background, a general feeling underlying everything we experience. We do not notice this somewhat dim, unclear, or dark substream, because it is usually covered by our sense impressions, thoughts, pleasures, and worries, but it is always there and contributes ceaselessly and essentially to the general, but at the same time concrete, resultant feeling of being ourselves. We do not usually perceive or discover this deeper part of our flowing personality in our meditation either. If we practice it according to some accepted method, which prescribes us to stop thinking and to concentrate on some meditation object. That is because in such situations we are just battling with our thoughts, or we become absorbed in our object of meditation, such as breathing, anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. But we can find this hidden part of our personality if we adopt an observing and watching attitude and direct it inside our body into its deeper part. Indeed, our body, that is our bodily feeling or the feeling of our existing as a bodily organism, must not be excluded from our concern and should receive due attention. This flow of life I am talking about is very closely linked to the bodily functions. Our life flows through them, if I may put it so. And through observation, we can discover that especially our digestive processes provide a definite coloring to that feeling of flowing life within us. I do not know whether you have noticed what an important and often decisive influence on our way of thinking, talking, and acting is exercised by the process of our digestion. But you certainly must have had at one time or another some difficulties or disorders in this respect, or even some pain, as a result of which your humor or frame of mind was surely disturbed. There do not have to be any serious troubles like that, and yet a subtle, unnoticed influence from the digestive region shapes our mood in one way or another. Maybe you are not pleased by this description of life, because in various schools of spiritual philosophy, the life process is being raised to divine heights and identified with God or with the primal creative force of the universe, or even with enlightenment. These are, of course, just metaphysical speculations and beliefs or interpretations of some personal experience in terms of cosmic speculative philosophy. But the bare facts of life experience, is not as noble as our thinking would like it to be. One aspect of it is for us really a somewhat crude bodily process, which is pleasurable on one side and disgusting on the other. We cannot exclude this basic aspect of all earthly life. I think that this experience about life, which I am trying to describe, is entirely in tune with the Buddhist orthodoxy, in which all life is often defined as a mere process of nourishment. And this not only on the material level, but in all spheres and on all levels. And so, disappointing as it may be or seem, the basic underlying experience of our being alive in this dim flow of living movement within us does not justify being glorified in any way, although we do not know its whole nature just because it is so dim and indefinite. But of course, apart from this dark stream of life, which we have some difficulty to trace when we try, there is another movement inside us, which is much brighter and cannot be related to our body nor localized, although we speak of it as being inside us, and it is sometimes located in our heads. This movement is the stream of consciousness. Although we think that we know our consciousness or are aware of it, if we want, this is by no means so. We have, in fact, no pure experience of consciousness, and the notion of a pure consciousness or of a bright stream of consciousness without anything in it, as it were, is only a concept, an abstraction created by our thought process. There is always something we are conscious of, be it a sense impression, a feeling, bodily or mental, an urge or desire, or a thought. Being conscious of things around us, to which we attribute independent existence, we also postulate an independent existence of our consciousness and infer sometimes that there must be a higher consciousness of which we are perhaps a part, etc., etc. All possible philosophical theories have been invented about it. We are, however, not at all concerned with them here. We want to be clear about what we actually know and experience. The stream of consciousness is in fact a movement from our being conscious of one thing to our being conscious of another thing. And our attention is always drawn to outer impressions and inner sensations or thoughts related to them. As a result, we find it difficult to discover the biological flow, the process going on at the bottom of our being, which I was describing. As I have already mentioned, we do not discover it during meditative concentration either. We may be very successful in our meditations and experience profound happiness, visualize symbols or figures, or even build up subtle states of abstract absorptions called in Pali arupacharas. Yet, the inexorable fact of our being bound to that disregarded process of nourishment and basic biological functions remains there, and sooner or later we have to come back to our normal consciousness and take steps to keep that process going by feeding ourselves and so on. We are bound to it by deep instincts for survival, one of the sankharas. Another cover-up of the biological flow is provided by pleasant worldly amusements, even if they are uplifting, like music or other arts. Indulging in them, of course, is often paid for by mental restlessness, and sometimes some of them lead even to giving up moral principles. Of course, selective enjoyments need not cause much harm and may be a balancing factor for our minds in ordinary life. But insight into the nature of our existence, in the Buddhist realistic view, is the realization of the basic fact that life is unsatisfactory and coupled with suffering of various kinds. And regarding the biological substream, do we not feel unsatisfactoriness as it, and is it not a sort of suffering when we see and consciously admit to ourselves that our life is possible only as a rather disgusting or peculiar process of nourishment? There are even in the Pali sources sometimes half ironical references of this sort. If this were not so, it would be hardly a taboo in decent social conversation to speak about them. So, if we decide to turn our attention to first discovering and then observing that dark biological stream in ourselves, we are not in danger of trying to escape from the unsatisfactory aspect of our existence, but come in fact into closer contact with it, and can then cope with it on the path of the spiritual effort. Now, if we make the effort to trace the biological substream of our being while observing also our stream of consciousness at the same time, with its changing contents during our meditation sessions, it will have an interesting effect. After the inevitable initial distractions, we shall find, sooner or later, that there are two, as it were, parallel streams flowing in us. The one dark, irrational, heavy, and the other light, bright, even sparkling, and containing a certain watchful insight into and wordless understanding of the nature of both these streams. Now, I'm not talking about something which can happen tomorrow afternoon when you sit down and start looking inside for the substream and try to also be aware of the stream of consciousness with its content. It may take days, weeks, months, years. Now, if we discover then these two parallel streams, the one dark and the other bright, and the bright one has the contents in it of the dark one then. Because it's only through consciousness that we eventually know that there is this dark stream. After all, it is consciousness which has it at its contents when one feels pain in the digestive region. So, after a time, we discover that although the two streams flow together, the contents of the consciousness and the happenings, as it were, in the dark stream have different rhythms. Then they somehow may be parallel, and the upper is aware of the lower, but they as it were, quarreling with each other. And that is because there is a different rhythm in them. The sequence of vibrations of the consciousness is much quicker than the vibrations of bodily processes. The Buddhist Orthodox teaching is aware of it. And in the section of the Pali Canon called Abhidhamma, which is sense for schematic systematization, says that the mental process is 16 times quicker than the bodily one. But I'm very sorry to say that I have been unable to count this process and verify it. But through meditation, the sequence of vibrations of consciousness can be slowed down, and it eventually comes to match the frequency of the biological stream. Now, an expert in the Abhidhamma philosophy, psychology of Buddhism, Abhidhamma is, my notes say, is a part of Pali Buddhist. So it has the authority. So someone going by the text of Abhidhamma Pitaka would say that the sequence of vibrations of consciousness, of mental processes, cannot be slowed down. It is simply flowing down in its own way. Well, in that way, if that is so, I would assume that the flashes of awareness, which the Abhidhammists counted, that in a moment there are 16 of them, while there is one in the bodily process, I would suggest that the consciousness can actually concentrate on the process of the biological flow for 16 consecutive moments without any change. And then, of course, they are harmonized. The two streams in our being can be gradually harmonized with each other, and when this is achieved, something quite extraordinary happens. It is as if the two streams would touch and then even merge into each other for a while. The result is a bright, intense, lightning experience. And if I should describe it, I can only say that it is like that one disappears into nothingness for a moment. No other way I could describe it. Then the light of consciousness appears again, and so does the dark substream as its object. Each one is having its own rhythm, but the substream does not seem to be as dark as it was before. There is a sort of indefinite dawn in it, as if a part or a reflex of the stream of awareness remained in touch with it. And things can now be seen in that stream, in that dark stream, which we haven't seen before, which were hidden from us. Although we now see that they in fact constitute much of what we are as human personalities. And we may be quite displeased with what we have thus momentarily seen. But no doubt, getting to know oneself as one really is after all a part of spiritual effort, isn't it? And it is in a way unpleasant to see oneself as one is, really. Not as one is seen by others, as one sees oneself in context of life, external life. Well, so that is a laboriously described experience of my many years of effort. So the entering the stream, and remember, it is not stream entering, it is entering, it is a process of entering the stream, as I have just described, is not a stream entry. Now, what I just told you, did I make it up? Is there an element of deception, or self-deception, or wishful thinking in it? I do not know. However, I can honestly say that I have been trying on and off to embark on the journey towards the ultimate solution of the riddle of existence. Beautiful phrase. Since the 15th year of my age, when I decided to study philosophy also in the university, hoping that will help me somehow. Sometimes I was following the Pali Buddhist orthodoxy and seeking advice from Venerable Theravada. Sometimes I was wrestling as an independent thinker or academic researcher, into the text and so on. Sometimes I was even trying to listen to the sound of one hand clapping. And at some time, allured by the inspiring personality of Lama Anagarika Govinda, I was even initiated by him into the right-hand Vajrayana practice of Arya Maitreya Mandala. I might have even tried, but didn't. The left-hand Vajrayana practice, if I had happened to meet a suitable female partner, conforming to the precise requirements as described within that system. But they are really rare and far between, probably, since I haven't met any and don't know anyone who did. And those who practice that way came to sticky ends. The best example of it being Trungpa. Well, who knows? As it is, I like to think that, in the sense described earlier, I have at least lifted my foot from its base in this world without being yet able to put it down on the path. So the foot is, as it were, still moving in the air. That means that I fancy myself in the intermediary process of entering the stream. And I am not worried that the phrase does not have a Pali equivalent. I probably am, in my modest efforts, in the company of many other fellow travelers who value the Buddha's message as a reliable guide, even though they might describe their practice and experiences in a different way. But it does cover, most of people modestly trying to find a way and have this attitude of trust, some confidence into what we inherited from the Buddha. Thank you. So, 1 hour? Yeah. So that's very modest for me. I usually speak 2 hours.
Well, has anyone questions for Karel?
Can I ask? You said that
Yes, I have. In order to hear from the audience, I have to resort to the modern technology. This is one of the pleasures of old age, that one can be helped, with these little computers.
I can repeat your question.
Okay. So, after so many decades of practicing Buddhism, because you came to know in the age of as a teenager, did you say finally that you, in entering the stream, the topic today, that you have only lifted the foot and not gone into the stream as yet? Is it, am I correct?
Yeah. Yes, I cannot claim stream entry. I'm still trying. Just, it's a metaphor, isn't it? It's a metaphor for the situation in which there are most Buddhist followers who go to meetings like this and so on, and meditate together sometimes or on their own. And if they are honest, they don't claim any, special achievements, but they still feel that they somehow have direction. And so that is what I think I have now, and that I have had ever since I started. It has not gone. I cannot claim a decisive experience that I would speak from certainty. And the stream entry would, as described, be absolute certainty. You can't go wrong then afterwards. You just wouldn't go wrong. When nothing is preventing you, but you just wouldn't, because you are on the stage that you just wouldn't. And that, of course, I cannot say. So when I abstain from doing the wrong thing with a stream entry, would simply not. I have to restrain myself. The temptation is there. I say, "Oh, no, I just," and then you impose it all. Discipline. So instead of having certainty, you have trust in what the Buddha said, and you discipline yourself. That's what, and that's what else can we do? So I have, while I've given so many talks, and I must say, honestly, can say that I have never pretended to be anything, but I have listened to many talks in which an indication was given of spiritual advancement of a high order. I can give you one example. I already mentioned one illustrious name, and some of you might disagree, but if you go into details, so you will agree with me. The other high example, Krishnamurti. I had even interviews with him. I even felt his ecstasy. Samatha bhavana is something else, that is not a certainty. That is just pleasure of a high order. And he had that. He transferred it on to me. So he had, but what he said, not directly, but indicated that he was at the top, at the end of the road, wasn't he? I've read almost all of his works. They had been translated into Czech, so I read some of them already as a teenager. And so when I came here, so naturally the first thing was I went to him. At that time he started his establishment here in '68 in Brockwood, which I visited several times even with my students. And yet, what was his end? It's just terrible to read. To read the story of the daughter of his mistress. And so that is the problem, that you have this high-powered, high-flying personalities, and yet you find they may be clever, they may be able to produce, of course, methodically the states of ecstasy covered in Buddhism by the samatha bhavana, and yet they do not guard you against the basic functions. And so it is the basic functions which we share with animals, which overpower them eventually when the temptation comes. So it's really a great temptation simply when one sees that one can speak, which, if necessary, without text, I can speak in a suggestive way as well. Yes, and I could draw a lot of people when I speak that way. And I did that before emigration. When I was reading the Krishnamurti talks, I took over his style, and people started looking at me with awe. I never said anything about myself, but I spoke his way. And it was so effective. And yet I looked into myself and I said, well, what are you doing? This is not quite it. So I stopped doing it. I started again with precise instructions how to do meditation, not just how to do the sotapatti-phala and so on. And I was teaching them hatha yoga. And then suddenly I had a smaller crowd, and only those interested, and then we had a conversation informal where I told them, this is what is the nearest task. You just do what benefits you in the situation in which you are, and you may hope sometime, that you will go deeper and further. But do not hurry it. There is plenty of time in samsara. Only keep the direction. Having mentioned hatha yoga, I can perhaps add that the discovery of this sort of meditation, which is not described anywhere in the canon, but it has resonances there, for which just confirmed to me that I'm not going astray. Hatha yoga has contributed to it, because doing the bodily exercises with concentration on the feeling in muscles and joints and so on actually teaches you to be able to live on that lower level for a while. That's very, so that actually contributed to my understanding, and so that the glimpse of when the two streams meet, that's really, I think, insight. That's real insight. That's real experience. It's not yet putting the foot down, because you just feel all right for a moment. The metaphor, of course, is too trivial to express the length which the entering can take. The entering can extend also over lives, and that is that one place where the limb sotapatti-anga, sotapatti-anga, yes, it sort of matches together. So that place actually confirmed to me that I was doing the right thing.
You mentioned Krishnamurti, but do you know of anybody else who actually achieved this? Stepping into the stream.
I'm not sure what actually.
An actual person who achieved it.
Do you know anyone who's entered the stream?
Oh, no.
What about Govinda?
Well, I had only I spent only 1 week in his seminar in the Hauterstille near Hamburg, when he used to come there occasionally. It was a splendid experience, but whether he had it, I don't know. He was absolutely perfect in every movement. He was conducting a puja, very elaborate one, Tibetan, because after all he lived in Tibet 20 years. He had a Tibetan guru, Tomo Geshe Rinpoche, who was actually higher than any Dalai Lama, any Kagilpa, Inkerle Tulku, and so on. But never in public. He was known only to few people. And I believe, Govinda, that he really was the right person in Tibet, and he died eventually in lotus position, and it was noticed only after about a week that he was and he got from him something. Now he was originally an archaeologist, and he was also a poet and also a painter. So he was an all-around personality which could charm you on any level. But he never went into the sort of formalities. To the puja, when he was doing it, was a beautiful ritual, Tibetan style, and he conducted in a way like an artist. It was an experience, artistic as well. His description of it was that you have to do it as a meditation. There is nothing else in your mind when you're doing it. He said, properly conducted ritual is meditation made visible, which is a wonderful phrase also, isn't it? And he appeared like that. No one else who did it in his absence, because he didn't come every year, so I went several times to Germany to this Ayurveda mandala, of which I became sort of initiated member. So no one else who did it had that same air about him. So I cannot say whether he was, how far he was. He never would say it about himself. After all, the Buddha even said that one should not disclose what. He disclosed it about himself, at least that is in the Pali Canon, that he said, I am the Buddha, I am the only one. So at that time he probably was the only one. So he said, but he forbade it to to his monks to speak about their achievements, because that seduces one, perhaps, to exaggerate and so on, and that's detrimental.
I think we have time for one more question. Time for one more?
I think one example in the Pali Canon of stream entry is at the first sermon that the Buddha gave to the 5 ascetics, and one of those ascetics called Kondana, I think, apparently became a stream enterer as a result of that hearing that sermon. And I think it's described in terms of an experiential insight into the Four Noble Truths and a distant glimpse of nirvana.
Yeah.
And I just wondered how that example fitted into your your argument, your view that it's it's rather a question of the foot never really alighting on the path.
Yes, well, there are so many instances in the Pali Canon described which show that at the time when the Buddha was around, so many people actually achieved instantly a stage. But the explanation traditionally given is that they would have been very high on the, or very far on the path already in past life, so that it was just a final push, which the presence of the Buddha that it was for them. So this is no longer available, and there is a sort of prevailing view among Buddhists, also the Theravada and some other sects as well, that it's no longer really possible, not absolutely out of the question, but it just doesn't happen any longer. But then, of course, you have the descriptions of solitary Buddhas, those who, without ever being publicly active, without being known, went so intensely into themselves that they did reach enlightenment without ever having any reason. So they are called pratyeka Buddhas or pacheka Buddhas. So there may be, who knows. Now, with Govinda having founded this order, Arya Maitra Mandala, at the advice of Tomakrishna Rinpoche before he died, and he said to him, you must bring it to the West. And that, that was even before the emigration started. Dalai Lama was still there, and so on. So the name itself suggests that the members sort of gear themselves to preserve the direction which would lead eventually to rebirth in the time and presence of the future Buddha, who, as both Pali and the other Mahayana, so accepts that a future Buddha is already, so to speak, waiting for the proper time, being in the high spheres of Tushita heaven. So that name of the organization actually suggests that mostly one should be careful to preserve the direction in order to eventually get the help which a living Buddha in the proper area will be able to give. And that would not happen in this world period. So many more incarnations, which can be, of course, according to the ability of meditation, in which samatha meditation is helpful, of course, because that raises the mind into subtler spheres, not of liberation, but of life in samsara. So one can spend longer periods in other spheres of life if one is practicing that way. It need not be always in this material world. So it would seem that the purpose of it was to prepare for the next world period, and that Buddha will appear. But we don't have to sort of take these formalities entirely as decisive, as highly important. What is important is our own practice, view of ourselves, honesty to oneself, keeping the direction without too much ambition.
Well, thank you, Karel. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And thank you for that caveat, that warning about teachers. And the real thing is that the practice is for us to do and to give ourselves to. And there's no doubt that if one does practice, it does bring together mind and body. It does unify those splits that we feel inside ourselves and are there, are present most of the time. And in particular, the big split of having all sorts of ideas about ourselves is really quite different from what we're actually encountering. And practice does actually bring us down to earth, to the reality of what we are as life, to the true acceptance and realization of that. Having said that, thank you once again, Karel, so much for coming, sharing.